Although spooky season never really ends, it is time for my October wrap up. Welcome to the depths. Hello, welcome to Reading from the Depths. My name is Lecton. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Today I have my wrap up of everything that happened in October. So I'll have timestamps down in the description as usual, but today I want to talk a little bit first about, I've been mentioning that I'm busy and I have exams coming up. And so I thought I'd just talk a little bit about what those are, why preparation for them is occupying so much of my time. And then I'm going to go through what I've read the last couple weeks, what I'm reading now, what I am hoping to read maybe in the next couple weeks, including in that will be my interpretation of the Read What You Own challenge. And then I'll talk about what you can expect on the channel in the next few weeks, what reviews are coming up, as well as a new project that I'm hoping to start next week, which will be a combination of my love of Stephen King as well as Buddhism. So we'll see if that works out. And then lastly, I have a couple thoughts going around my head about entitlement and expectation on the part of readers and the books they're reading as well as the authors they're reading from. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that at the end. So first, I've been mentioning in my last few videos how busy I am. It's impacted my reading because I have exams coming up. And many of you may wonder, what does it mean for a monk to have exams? Well, in my flavor of Tibetan Buddhism, let's say, which is the Gelug lineage of Tibetan Buddhism, we have this title that is given out called the Geshe title, or the Geshe degree, we say. And it is a recognition of a deep understanding and experiential understanding of Buddhist philosophy. And at least in my monastery, to earn that title takes around 20 years. It can take between 20 and 26 years, depending on what level of degree you're aiming for. And when I say I'm studying, the main pedagogical method in our monastery and in our tradition is debate. And so we use debate. When we have private classes, we study texts closely, and we have teachers that go through text with us and bring up doubts and so forth. But the main method we use is debate. And if you ever do a Google search for Tibetan monks debating, you'll see what a debate is like. It is energetic and it's frantic. And then generally, you'll have two people debating. One person will be sitting and one person will be standing. The person sitting is the one who's answering. They have to make some sort of truth claim. And the person standing, the person debating against them, is trying to get the answerer to either contradict themselves or to they're trying to show the flaw in the answerer's reasoning. And when you debate, I should say, technically, you're only allowed to form your questions in a very specific way, and you're only allowed to answer in very specific ways. So there is like a form to it that you have to fit all of your responses into. And so an example would be if I'm debating against you and I ask you, is the sky blue? And you say yes. Well, then I'd say, well, it follows the logical consequence of your statement, the sky is blue, is that the sky is a color, because blue is a color. Therefore, the sky is a color. So then you'd say, okay, no, the sky isn't blue. The color of the sky is blue, which seems like a pedantic point. But when you're dealing with the nature of reality, that matters. When you're dealing with colors and shapes and so forth, it doesn't matter. But so then you say, okay, the sky isn't blue. The color of the sky is blue. So then I'd say, well, it follows that orange and red and purple are blue. And why is that? Because the color of the sky at the time of sunset is orange and red and purple. And therefore, those are actually blue. And therefore, orange and red and purple are not contradictory with the color blue. So obviously, you can't accept that. So then you say, well, the color of the sky isn't blue. The color of the sky at midday is blue. And the color of the sky at twilight and the color of the sky at sunrise are different. So then you have to say, well, the color of the sky is dependent upon the time of day. And so then even if you kind of iron that out, then I could say, well, it follows that the sky itself has a color, as opposed to the particles of dust and so forth that are suspended in the atmosphere upon which the sun's light reflects and causes that color to emerge. So is that color a property of the sky, or is it a property of the dust and so forth that are, suspended in the sky? And so like that, you're trying to look at that person's answer and whatever it may be, and to shake them, right? To get them to either contradict themselves or to prove why their answer is incorrect in some way. And the person who's answering is expected to, speak the truth to some extent, make a truth statement. When you're the person debating, you are not beholden to the truth at all. You can be sneaky and manipulative as much as you want, because your goal is to shake up your opponent, right? So this is our main form of debate. And the point of it is that as we go through these more than 2 decades worth of study, we're not just looking to have an intellectual understanding of Buddhist philosophy. We want to have an experiential understanding, which means we want to understand everything the Buddha taught in such a way that we have an unshaken and stable awareness of not only the teachings, but how they apply to every aspect of life. And so that involves looking at critiques and looking at other philosophical systems, both other Buddhist systems and other non-Buddhist systems, and what critiques they might level against our system, and say, how do you defend against that? And if they say this and we accept that to being true, then doesn't that contradict this other thing? And so forth. We have to be able to have an experiential understanding of all that, and debate as a pedagogy helps push you toward that. It also helps you to engage in critical reading in such a way because you don't take words at face value. Whenever you see a truth statement, whatever it may be, such as the truth statement, the sky is blue, then you automatically have a question going in your head. Well, what do they mean by the sky is blue? Do they mean the color of the sky is blue, or do they mean the sky itself is blue? And even either one of those, does that mean that it's an emergent property of the sky or of the particles suspended in the sky, and so forth? So you always have this critical analysis going whenever you engage in an action of reading or of engaging, whether it be scripture or other texts. So that's our main pedagogy. And now at the monastery, we have exams every year, and this is like a new thing. Traditionally, there weren't exams in Tibet, but once they moved into exile in India in the last couple of decades, they have wanted to fashion themselves more like Western universities, and so having an exam structure is parallel to that. And the exam we have coming up is called our debate exam. And so the way the debate exam works is I am given right now, I have a booklet that has about 200 questions in it that cover all the different subjects I've studied this year. And when it comes time for my debate exam, I'll be sitting in a room with my class as well as 4 or 5 other classes. And there will be 5 judges. And once my name is called, I have to go pick an envelope. And that envelope will have 2 questions in it. And I have 5 minutes to choose one of those questions and to prepare a debate around that question. And then I'll debate for 10 minutes. And then when I'm done debating, I have to sit down and I have to answer for 10 minutes to one of my classmates. And so that is incredibly stressful because you have to have debates prepared for every possible topic that you've studied all year long. And not only do you have to have debates prepared, but you have to have answers for every debate as well. And at least for me, it's not only that you have to have this knowledge, but you then have to perform this knowledge in front of 5 judges, as well as a few hundred other monks who are all watching and judging you. And of course, the whole thing is in Tibetan. None of this is in English. Of course, that would be too easy. Nothing we do is in English. Everything is in Tibetan language only. So that is what is coming up for me in the middle of November. And preparation for that is very stressful. So it just means extra study sessions with all of my classmates, literally reviewing every single thing I've covered all year long. So a whole year's worth of material you have to review in the span of a month or so. And so that's very stressful. And even if it isn't stressful, it's still time consuming. So that is what is eating up my reading time, especially. So because of that, I haven't got as much reading done as usual. And what I have done, I've read a lot of novellas and short stories that I can sneak in like around the margins. And I think those numbers are even going to go down in the next 2 weeks as my exam gets closer and closer. But for now, I did get some reading done in the last 2 weeks. So let's talk about that. Over the last 2 weeks, I did finish 9 titles, but of those 9 titles, 4 of them are novellas, and one of them is a short story collection. First, I finished these 3 novellas that kind of work together, and they're all by Brendan LaFaro, and I received them as ARCs, so I'm going to do a review of them in a few weeks when the 3rd one is released. The first 2 were released last year, I believe. And so these are 3 horror Western novellas. The first one is called Noose, the second one is called The Demon of Devil's Cavern, and the third one is called Where the Daybreak Ends. And they all are focused on this fictional town of Buzzard's Edge in Arizona in, the late 19th century. And these are a lot of fun. The first one is a little too short, actually, even though it's a novella. It's a really short novella, and I feel like it doesn't give you as much oomph as it could. It's missing out a lot of details. The second one makes up for that quite a lot. I thought the second one was really good. And now there's actually another novella coming that is following that main storyline. But what he did for this new book, the one that's being released this December, is it's a collection of short stories that tell the oral history of that town. So it doesn't follow the normal continuation of the main storyline that we followed in the first 2 books. Instead, it's an oral history of the town itself, and it starts before we have met the town and the other stories, and then it goes chronologically and tells maybe a dozen different stories. And there's a wraparound story about why and how they're telling those stories. And I think it's really smart. I think it's a really smart way to give us more background on the town and to give the author a chance to tell stories that wouldn't fit into the main narrative with the main characters that he's following in the first two novellas and in the next novella that's coming, or novel. I think he refers to the second one as a novel, but it's a really short novel if it is a novel. I think I read it more as a novella. But either way, having this short story collection with a wraparound story as a way to tell an oral history was really great. So those were the first three books I read for in the last 2 weeks. And then I had a chance to read American Rapture by CJ Lead, and I already put a review of this up on my channel. This is the follow-up to Mayfly, which she wrote last year, and I thought this was great. I thought it was a look at religion as an institution, but also the effects of shame and guilt and how those can overwhelm your experience of understanding who you are as a person. And so this is CJ Lead's take on a zombie apocalypse story. So it is a dystopian future where there's a zombie apocalypse that is overshadowed by this religious horror as well. And the main character has grown up in a very conservative Catholic household, and that has shaped who and how she is. And so she has to try to survive the zombie apocalypse, but the zombies are these feral, lust-filled zombies. So they're not zombies in the traditional sense of the word. They're not the undead, and they do die. But they are fulfilling the role of zombies in survival horror genre, and I thought it was great. I thought it was really smart. It was bloody. It was gory. It was emotional. It was really well paced. I had a great time with it. There's a review already on my channel, so I do recommend that you watch that review, but also read the story. I liked it more than I liked Mayfly, actually. I thought the writing was stronger. In both of them, I thought the writing tone was different. The writing tone was matching the story in a way that I thought was very appropriate. So I highly recommend it. That's American Rapture by CJ Lead. And then I finally finished my anthology, Best Horror of the Year, Volume 15, edited by Alan Datlow. And this was great. It was really wonderful. It was a curation of the best short horror stories from 2022 and one novella at the end. And there are a few misses, but for the most part, I thought it was really, really fun. And I enjoyed all the stories, and some of them were really, really good. So, that's kind of what I've come to expect from collections that are edited by Alan Datlow. So what was really nice about this, though, not only did she include stories, but she included in the beginning like a summary of 2022. And she included dozens of other stories and novellas and novels and magazines and mixed media that she thought were noteworthy. And so there's like a whole TBR list of 100 different titles you could get just from the intro to this book. So I thought the whole thing was really well done and really well curated. The next two books I finished were both arcs. One of them is called The Shutouts by Gabriel Korn. So there'll be a review of this coming up, but this is set in the future after a climate apocalypse, and it is in the same world as the previous novel she had written. You don't have to read the first novel to read this one, but so this follows some similar characters and some different characters in a climate apocalypse. There are multiple storylines happening, one happening around 2030, one happening around 2040, and one happening around 2080. And it's really an exploration of character and of relationships using this really horrific climate apocalypse as the backdrop. And so I have a review for that coming out soon. I really enjoyed it. The next one I finished is The Peculiar Garden of Harriet Hunt, and this is by Chelsea Iverson. And this I did not like so much. This is set in Victorian England, and the main character is a young woman who lives alone with her father. Her mother died when she was young, and you don't know the circumstances of that until later in the book, but she feels guilty about the incident, quote unquote. And the beginning of the book, her father has left, and he disappeared 7 months ago. He didn't tell her where he was going, and so she's been living on her own for 7 months, which she finds as a freedom because her father was oppressive and hateful and abusive to her. But she doesn't have any way to support herself. She doesn't have any way to make income. And everyone in the town thinks she is an odd person, a weirdo. And part of that is because she spends all of her time talking to the plants in her garden, who she believes respond to her. And she believes that they move to her, meet her emotional needs, and that they rise up to, caress her when she is unhappy, and they grow extra thorns and attack people when she is angry, and so forth. So there is this fantastical, magical, realist element of the kind of sentience of this garden that she's cultivated. And she is trying to figure out what to do moving forward as police investigators start coming by to find out where her father is, because they believe that she has engaged in some sort of nefarious action to get him out of the way. Meanwhile, at the same time, they keep trying to commit her to an insane asylum, because any young woman living on her own must obviously be hysterical and need to be institutionalized. And so the whole setup, I think, is really great. And I like the main story itself. I just had a really hard time with this main character. This main character has no character growth or development for the first 80% of the book. She just constantly shoots herself in the foot over and over again. And I can see, given the environment and the setting, obviously the patriarchal society and the parochial society that she's part of, the way she's treated makes sense. And her kind of demure attitude of always trying to hide in the shadows and not call attention upon herself. Like, this all makes sense given her history. But the way she goes about trying to solve any of her problems just feels so backwards. And there is character growth, there is some sort of resolution, but it happens so quickly right at the end. And the whole beginning, the whole first 80% of the book, found myself remarkably frustrated with her as a character, and as a reader, because it didn't feel like she was doing anything new. There was no reason for the whole 50% of the book to exist, because she did almost nothing. There was no character development, there was no character growth. Things happened to her, and they could have happened in one chapter, and instead they were spread out over a whole lot of chapters. So I don't think I'm going to do a full review of this. I do have a written review of it. I liked the story. I thought the writing was really nice. I thought the world was interesting and well, explained. And I liked the magical realist elements of it. I just thought the character growth and the pacing were so slow and laborious and almost non-existent that it really detracted from my pleasure reading the story. So some people may enjoy it. It has a lot of other good reviews, and other people seem to think that the characters' progression and growth made sense. For me, it felt like nothing happened in terms of internal character development. Nothing happened until like the 80% mark, and then everything happened all at once. And I liked where it ended up, and I thought that was a natural place for the story to go. I just would have liked it to happen incrementally, as opposed to all of a sudden things just happening. Maybe you'll enjoy it, maybe not. It was not for me, though. Then I had a chance to read Rest Stop. So Rest Stop is by Nat Cassidy, who wrote Mary, and he wrote Nestlings. And I love his previous horror books. I think they have a really strong voice, really engaging characters, really smart way of writing. And Rest Stop is no different. It's really short, but the writing is so much different than both Mary and Nestlings. It's very, the main character is like a metal musician, and it has that kind of manic energy. And you get right to the heart of who he is as a character. And so he's able to develop a character really quickly in a high stakes scenario, in a very interesting world that he's built in a very short period of time. So the main character is on his way to visit his grandmother who is dying, who has just had a stroke, and he doesn't want to visit her. He doesn't like her, yet his siblings have called him and said, you have to be here because we don't want her to write us out of her will, basically. And so he's been delaying to go see her, and he's on the road, and it's sometime after midnight, and he stops to get gas, and he stops at a rest stop, and he gets locked in a bathroom, and a whole lot of bad shit happens to him. And it's just a really smart premise for a story. It's not the first one. I actually watched a movie a couple years ago starring Ryan Kwanten. I can't think of the name of it right now, but where he also is traveling on a highway and gets locked in a rest stop, and a lot of crazy shit happens in the bathroom of a rest stop. And that one took a different kind of cosmic turn, that this one went into a different direction. But it's just a really good setting for a story. The novella is tight, it is quick, it is to the point, and yet it has a lot of emotional depth to it. Even for like a bloody, I guess it's bloody gory. I mean, there are a few instances of it. So yeah, that is Rest Stop by Nat Cassidy. I had a ball with it. I thought it was a lot of fun. It was not what I expected from this author. The writing style and tone was wildly different than what I've read from him before, which is really refreshing because it shows that he can tug at your emotional heartstrings while adding the creepy factor and the horror factor, and do it in multiple styles. So it was really refreshing to read this, and to see that this author has more than one trick up his sleeve. And then the last book I read, or the last title I finished, was I Might Be in Trouble by Daniel Amen. And this I'm also going to do a review of. This was a review copy, but the main storyline is a young writer who was a huge success with his first novel that was published when he was 22, and then his second novel flopped. And now he is trying to write his third novel, but he is struggling, and his boyfriend left him, and he feels lonely, and he hooks up with some guy that he meets on an app, and then he wakes up the next morning, and that guy is dead in his bed, and he has to figure out what to do. And instead of calling the police, he calls his agent, and he and his agent have to figure out how to get rid of this body and how to move forward. So it is this dark comedy that is really looking at loneliness, and it's looking at what it means to feel like a broken person and not know how to put yourself back together again. It's also navigating this idea of success, and the idea that success will cure loneliness in some way, as opposed to breeding loneliness. So I thought it was a really fun story. It was quick. I was teaching this last weekend in Bangalore, and so I had a couple 6-hour bus rides, and I read the whole thing on the bus ride home. So it's a quick read. It's only a few hundred pages, I think 300 pages or so, and it's really the writing style is really propulsive and tight. So I had a fun time with it. It was kind of expected, the emotional journey the character went on, but it was funny, and that journey was a fun one to go on, and it gave you a lot to think about at the end. There were some pacing problems in the third act, but overall, I thought it was a good story. So I will do a full review of that closer to the publication date. So that is what I read in the last 2 weeks. So what am I reading right now? The only title I'm reading right now is GARBOLOGY. I finally started GARBOLOGY. It took me a while to get started with it, and I think 2/3 of the way through. I might actually finish it before October is up. I'm recording this on the 28th. But anyway, I'm having a great time with it. And I read a lot of short fiction, like a good amount of short fiction. Every month I read at least 1 or 2 short story collections or anthologies. And I think this is a great collection. And I'm obviously biased because I have a short story that's published in it, but I think it's really good. And I know a lot of the authors are first time authors. And I'll be honest, I read a lot of debut authors or new authors as well, because I read a lot of ARCs, of advanced reader copies. And since I don't actually work for a publication, and since I don't have a big following, I often am not accepted to be given advanced reader copies of like high profile books. So I get the lower profile books. So I get the hungry authors that want anyone to read their book. So a lot of the books I read are by new authors, whether they're debut or new authors. So I'm used to kind of some of the stylistic hiccups that new authors often run into. And sure, there are a lot of those in this collection. Like, you can tell that some of these authors, it is their first time being published, myself included, right? But at the same time, what comes with that, sometimes, maybe the dialogue feels a little bit jilted. Maybe some of the plot structuring is a little bit heavy-handed. Sure. Yet there's an earnestness to young authors and hungry authors and new authors that is hard to replicate. There is a real hunger in the way that new authors write that is just fun to read. And so, like I said, I'm only about 2/3 of the way through, maybe a little less, 60% through with GARBOLOGY right now, and I'm having a blast with it. I think it's a lot of fun, and it's sure you can knock it as being green authors who still need to hone their craft for at least some of the stories, but they're still fun to read. There's still like heart in those stories. There still is something that the authors feel and need to express, and you can tell there's an excitement behind the stories and behind the chance to actually write these stories and share them, and that carries the anthology. I'm having a great time with it, and I look forward to see what other short story collections come out of CriminOlly's channel and the new Trash Talk collection that they're actively seeking submissions for right now. That'll be published next year. I'm already excited for it. So that's what I'm reading right now. Now, what do I plan on reading in November? I have, I think, 8 or 9 advanced reader copies that are all going to be published in December that I haven't read yet. So I'm going to be trying to read those. And that's going to probably take up a lot of my reading. I hope to read, or I very much intend to read, the final book in the Farseer trilogy by Robin Howe. I've read the first 2 books over the last 2 months, and so I'm really excited about that. I'm having a great time with that trilogy. The Assassin's Apprentice being the first one, and then The Royal Assassin is the second one. And then the third one, The Assassin's Quest, I think it's called. I'm not quite sure. There are it's a 16-book series called The Realm of the Elderlings, and a lot of them have the word assassin in the title. I can't remember exactly where I am now, but the second one ended at a really interesting place, and the way the plot turned right at the end was really interesting. So I'm excited to read the third book, but it is I think 600 or 700 pages. So hopefully I'll read that. The only other thing I really have planned is it is Novelization November, and I recently purchased a copy of the novelization of Terrifier 2 by Tim Wagner. So Terrifier 2 is the grindhouse horror movie starring Art the Clown. Terrifier 3 just hit theaters and was the #1 movie in the theater. #1 movie in the country last week or the week before. And so the second movie, there's a novelization of it that was made, and I'm really excited to read it. And I bought it a few weeks ago, but this is India, so things don't always get here quickly. So I still haven't received it yet, but I should get it in a week or 2. And so that's the only other thing I'm planning on reading. I'm keeping my TBR really slight because I have so many advanced reader copies, and because I know, at least for the first 2 weeks of November, I'm going to be quite busy. So that comes to my version of the Read What You Own challenge. And so for those of you, I'm sure everyone watching my channel knows, but CriminOlly started this challenge a couple years ago as a way for himself to navigate how many books he collects and to get rid of this ever-growing pile of books that he owns that he hasn't read. And so he set himself a goal of reading 100 books that are already in his collection before buying any new books. And that is what was the birth of the Read What You Own challenge. And this is the third or the fourth year that he is doing it, and YouTube or BookTube kind of took to it. So many people take up this challenge. And so I will link to his announcement video for those of you who are interested in seeing the way he describes the challenge. The way I'm going to do the challenge is a little bit different. Most of the books I read are digital. I don't have many physical books. And in part because they're harder to get here in India, and in part just because I don't need more physical things. But I have collected maybe 60 or so physical books that I have here. And I also have a bunch of physical books back in the States, mostly short story collections that I have supported on Kickstarter for the most part. Whenever I finish any physical books here in India, when I do go back to the States, which is maybe once a year or once every 18 months, whatever books I've finished, I bring with me, and then I replace them with books that are waiting for me at my sister's house in America. So I have about 50 or 60 books here that I haven't read yet, physical books. And so for me, what I'm going to do for the Read What You Own challenge is I'm committing to read at least half of those physical books before I read any other digital book, not counting my ARCs, because I do have these advanced reader copies that I'm committed to reading. So that's my exception, is advanced reader copies. But not only will I not buy any books, I will not read any digital books until I get through at least half of my physical books that I have here with me in India. And that's exciting because I have some books that are classics that I've been meaning to reread or read for the first time, and I haven't gotten to yet. So, I've never read The Exorcist or Rosemary's Baby, and both of those I have copies of because I want to read them, but I've never found time to read them. And I have a copy of Frankenstein, which I've been meaning to reread for a long time and just haven't had the chance. So this is an excuse for me to clear out some of these physical books and make room on my shelf for new physical books. So once they're done here, I won't be going to America for probably, at least maybe 8 months or 9 months. But when I do go back, I will bring these with me, and now I'll have shelf space for new books. So I don't know the exact number yet because I have to count how many books I have. But I'm going to commit myself to reading half of my physical books before I read any digital books. And then I think I will read the same number of digital books before I buy any other new books. So if I have 60 books here, I'm going to read 30 physical books and then 30 digital books. And that would be the extent of my Read What You Own challenge. So before I purchase any new books, that is what I will do. My exceptions are I have a few outstanding holds at the library, at a few libraries. So if those books come in while I'm waiting, I'll read those because the holds only last for 2 weeks usually. And the arcs that I have that I've committed to reading already. So those are my exceptions. They won't count towards my totals in any way. But so that starts on November 5th. So I am excited to, be part of the Read What You Own challenge, even if my way of doing it is a little uncommon and not quite the same as the way the rules that CriminOlly and his other co-hosts have laid out in the challenge. So then I have a few reviews coming up in the next few weeks. So the next review coming out is Don't Let the Forest In by C.G. Drews, and this was phenomenal. I really, really enjoyed this. I read this a while ago, and I thought it was great. And then I have, what else? I do have them. Oh, I have The Queen by Nick Cutter, who wrote The Troop, and this was a really fun body horror coming-of-age story. I thought this was good, really fast-paced. Feast While You Can by Michaela Clements and Anjali Datta. This is like a folk horror story about possession that takes place in a small town with a queer romance at the heart of it. And this I also really enjoyed. And then The Hangman's Belief, which is a werewolf story by a first-time author. And it's like a werewolf slash special ops story that I thought was actually also really fun. I thought the pacing was good. And I read this quite a long time ago because I thought the release date was originally listed as being like 3 months earlier than it is. And the release date got pushed back until the end of October. So I think I'd finished it to be released in August, and then it got pushed back to being released in October. So I finished this quite a while ago, but that review is also going to be coming out. So those are the reviews that are coming up on the channel. So that brings me to this new project that I'm hoping to undertake. I've had a number of people ask me to do something with Stephen King because I love Stephen King, And in 2022, I finished reading all of the books that I hadn't read. I've been reading Stephen King. He was the first adult author that I read when I was 10. So when I first started reading adult fiction, quote unquote. And I've been reading him so for the last 3 decades. And I have read his entire catalog. Um, I think I think there's one of the hard case crime books I haven't read yet still, to be honest. But everything else I've read. And so many people have asked me to do something with Stephen King, and it's very timely right now that Troy, as well as Alex from Alex Unabridged, both have released Stephen King ranking videos. But I'm not great at ranking videos. My kind of opinion changes all the time. So I was thinking I would do some book tags, but do them the Stephen King edition. That was my first plan, and I might still do that. I think that would be a fun way to do a book tag, but also focus on my love for Stephen King. But instead, what I think I want to do is, because a lot of people have also asked me to maybe talk about some of the Buddhist ideas and philosophies that I reflect on as I read books, and how I see those explored in fiction, even if not explicitly on the part of the author, but for me as a reader, how I pull out different things to think about that are in line with Buddhist philosophy and with my understanding of the world. So what I thought I would do is a project that I'm calling The Buddhist Path in Fiction, and this is going to be the Stephen King edition. And so I'm going to read through different Stephen King books as highlighting different elements of Buddhist philosophical thought or belief or things to contemplate and meditate on. And I don't know if it's going to work. I have a plan for it. And so next week, next Monday, will be my introduction video. It won't be covering a specific book, but it'll be talking about the project as a whole, what I hope to do with it, how I hope to structure it, and where I think we'll go. If it's going to work or not, I don't know. But that is the project I'm undertaking. And I'll have an introduction next week, so that'll give much more details about it. I'm excited about it. It gives me a chance to even reread more Stephen King that I haven't read in a while, because I'm going to read the books over again to make sure that I'm not, imagining them incorrectly or remembering them incorrectly. And so I'm excited. So that is this new project that I'm going to hopefully be undertaking, the Buddhist Path in Fiction, Stephen King edition. Stick around next Monday to see the introduction and the first entry to that. I think it might be a once a month project. It might be ongoing for a long time, but we'll see. I don't know. So I'm excited about that, and I hope other people are as well. So that concludes all of my channel stuff. And the last thing I want to talk about, and I don't have a lot of thoughts, but it's something I've been thinking about a little bit, not enough to do a full video, but this idea of expectation and entitlement on the part of a reader, from what we expect a book to be and what we expect an author to give us. This is Editing Lectin jumping in to say that as I was recording this final section, about halfway through, all of a sudden I realized it was really quiet. And you might think it's normal to be quiet in a monastery in the morning, but that's not the case for most Tibetan Buddhist monasteries. I live in a house with about 30 other monks, and it's never quiet in the mornings. So that quiet let me know that everyone else had left. All the boys had left to go to school, and the older monks had left to go to debate. And the debate courtyard is about half a kilometer from my house. So I rushed through the back half of this section in order to make sure I could also get to debate in time. And so I was able to express my main thoughts. I had some more nuanced ideas I wanted to talk about, and I did not get to those. But hopefully I was able to kind of express my thoughts enough that it is a starting point for conversation down in the comments section. Thanks. And I think expectation and entitlement are different things, but they are just differences of degree, really, not type, I think entitlement is always harmful, and it is always kind of negative, where it is the reader kind of imposing some sort of ownership on the artistic property that the author creates, expecting the author or the novel to meet our needs instead of being whatever creative outlet they want it to be. And I think you see this in film very loudly recently with, for instance, really rabid fan bases review bombing movies because they have casting of women or people of color or something else that the rabid fans feel is against what their headcanon says the story should be. And so you see that in films. All of the Star Wars prequels basically have this kind of energy about them. I think a good example in novels is a few years ago they published a sequel to Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. And the sequel, I know there's a whole bunch of debates about the authenticity of it, insofar as, was it meant to be published as a book? Was it a rough draft? Was it the estate just pushing this because they wanted money? So there are these questions about that. But take those aside, the big controversy is that Atticus Finch, who is the main character of To Kill a Mockingbird in the sequel, Go Set a Watchman, turns out to be racist. And the whole first book is about him as a lawyer defending a black person, in antebellum South. And so for him to be a racist just like shook a lot of people to the core because they thought he was a person who was doing the right thing for the right reasons. And Harper Lee has said that Atticus Finch is based on either her father or her grandfather. The idea that someone can still be racist and do kind of civil rights work that was done in The Killing Mockingbird was really contradictory to people. And so people felt ownership over Atticus Finch and ownership over To Kill a Mockingbird because it's such a beloved story. And so there was a lot of outrage about the idea that Atticus Finch could be racist and how could she dare destroy the legacy of her character in that way. And that entitlement is interesting because we don't have ownership over anything that a creator puts out. Even if we feel that that is not the best direction for that character or that property or that artistic endeavor to go, that does not affect our experience of the first book or of anything else in the series, right? So this idea of entitlement is just really interesting, and it is kind of us trying to control the world around us. And the more we try to control the world around us, I feel like the more unhappy we're going to be because we can't control it. And so in art, when people are willing to share their art with us, I want to experience that art the way the artist wants to put it out in the world. And now I may not end up receiving it the same way they do, and I may want something different, but there's more art that I can consume. So the idea that an artist has to give me what I want is really boring, I think. I want artists to be challenging me, and I want art to be constantly causing me to rethink my suppositions about how things exist, And even if I don't agree with the art that is made, that's much more interesting than artists giving me things that I want all the time. And I think entitlement culture is this idea that if I want something, that is the way it should be. And so I don't think that is useful for art. I think most people would agree with that. But then expectations is like the younger child of entitlement. And expectation culture and hype culture is a big thing in the literary world. A big part of the booktube and Bookstagram and Book Talk are all about hyping up books. And how many times have you read a book that you was so overhyped that then you read it and you were just disappointed? Not because the book wasn't good, but because your expectations of that book were so much higher than it needed to be. And so, in general, it's easy to say, and as a Buddhist, it's very easy to say that all expectations are projecting our interpretation of reality and then engaging with that projection instead of engaging in actual reality. And as long as we're engaging in a projection and not what really is, then we're just setting ourselves up for disappointment. And I believe that to be true in all areas of life. And yet, there's a little twist because I realize that my expectations of something do shape how I read it. And I realized this last month, or in the last couple weeks, I finished a book called The Last Hour Between Worlds by Melissa Caruso. And this is a fantasy book, like an urban fantasy book. And when I read it, I thought it was a debut novel by this author. And I gave the author a lot more leeway for what I felt was not great plotting and some mediocre writing, because I said, this is a new author working out the kinks of their writing style. And then I found out the author had already published 2 other complete trilogies before starting this one. And all of a sudden, my expectations were much higher. And the things that I was willing to forgive from a debut author, I was not willing to forgive anymore. And none of this was like an explicit process in my mind. But when I realized that, my impression of the book soured right away because I said, oh, this author should have known better or should have done better. And none of that, like I said, I wasn't intentionally thinking those things. That wasn't like a clear, explicit thought process that had that. But that was my experience, and reflecting upon it and how my mood on the book soured so quickly. That was the point and the reasoning around which it soured. And so when I have expectations almost in a negative light, when I don't expect too much, then I'm positively rewarded more often than not. So, which is almost saying it's good to take a pessimistic outlook, because if you have a pessimistic outlook, then the worst case scenario is your expectations will be met. And the best case scenario is your expectations will be exceeded. And I don't want to live that way. Like, I don't think that's a good way to live. But there is something about keeping expectations low and doing that in such a way that isn't pessimistic, but is allowing you space to always be surprised and to give grace to the artists and to let the art blossom in a way that is more interesting and exciting. So let the expectations not confine what you think the art is going to be, but to set a ground that the art can build upon. I think that is useful. But it is a difficult balance. I think another example is with the Farseer trilogy I'm reading right now. Before I started reading it, there are so many people that love The Realm of the Elderlings and the Farseer trilogy as one of the great fantasy series. So those expectations are really high. But then a lot of other people right away say, well, you have to be aware that it is a little bit slow and that the pacing is very kind of meticulous and slow, at least in the Farseer, in that first trilogy. And so if you're going in expecting a lot of action and a fast-paced story, then you'll be disappointed. So I did set my expectations, both with I had high expectations because the series is so loved, but I knew going in that if I wanted something fast paced, full of action, I wasn't going to get it. So by reconfiguring my expectations, I was able to meet the story where it was. And by doing that, I've had a really great time with the two stories so far. And I'm really looking forward to continuing with the whole series. So in that way, expectations helped me, right? Because they helped create a realistic expectation of what I am going to meet when I engage this story, this narrative, this world that is being built. So I don't have any concrete thoughts. I think in general, expectations aren't useful. If we are projecting our understanding of reality and engaging with that misunderstanding instead of engaging with reality itself, we're destined to be disappointed, right? When things are overhyped, when everyone is loving something, all we're doing is creating a bubble around a thing that is confining it to exist in a certain way. And if it doesn't meet those parameters, then we're going to be disappointed. And so, in general, I think expectations can be harmful, especially if you don't realize how much you are giving into expectations and treating expectations as if they were reality. Yet, at the same time, I think sometimes if you can set a reasonable expectation, that is a good way for you to give a book or a story or any art or any person you're living with or engaging with, anything you're doing in your life. If you set a reasonable expectation, not being pessimistic, but set an expectation that is a baseline upon which growth can happen and upon which you can discover what is being presented to you in a meaningful and complete and realistic and honest way, then they can be helpful. If you can have a sense of what you're going into without that sense being confining or limiting, then they can, set you up for success. So, as a philosophical idea, I think expectations are generally harmful. I think they are us engaging with imagination instead of with reality. And that is not a way to find actual long lasting happiness. It's only setting you up for disappointment. But on a specific scale, when talking about reading and engaging in art, I think trying to have a roadmap that is somewhat realistic understanding of what you're getting into can actually help tamper certain expectations that might be confining and then instead present an opportunity to engage with something on the terms that that art is presenting. So what I'm saying is when you have that level of expectation, like I'm going into the Farseer trilogy knowing it is slow burn kind of reading, then that is me being willing to meet the story where it is and not having a sense of entitlement or ownership of it, but instead letting the author, letting the creator, letting the artist create in such a way that is meaningful to them and being willing to meet them on their terms. And if I think those terms aren't terms that I'm going to find pleasurable, then I don't have to do it, right? So I get rid of any ideas of entitlement. I'm willing to accept this thing as it is being presented and created. And I use that as a way not to confine something or expect certain things out of it, but instead as a way to let that art surprise me, as a way to let it be joyful and something that can grow in a meaningful and natural way. So those are some of my thoughts. They're not entirely well thought out, but I'm just thinking about them a lot due to my experiences with the Farseer trilogy recently and with this book by Melissa Caruso and how quickly my opinion of that book changed between when I thought she was a debut author versus when I realized she had already written 2 full trilogies. And so if you have any thoughts about expectations or entitlement culture as it relates to engaging with art, I'd love to hear it down in the comments. That's all I have for today, though. So thank you for spending some time with me. I appreciate you. Be kind to yourselves, take care of each other, and go slowly.